Did you know that Oxford and Cambridge were founded during the so-called Dark Ages? Or that medieval surgeons performed advanced procedures? While many popular TV shows and historical dramas portray the Middle Ages as a time of ignorance and darkness, depicting life under the strict control of lords and the church, this is far from the truth. Let's dive into the most common myths about the Middle Ages and uncover the reality behind this fascinating era. One of the most persistent myths is the idea of the Middle Ages as the Dark Ages. This term is often associated with a period of complete stagnation, with the church suppressing knowledge, widespread illiteracy, and a decline in scientific progress. But the reality is far more complex. The term Dark Ages was first introduced by the poet Francesco Petrarch in the 14th century, who used it to describe the decline in literary quality in Italy following the fall of the Roman Empire. Petrarch did not mean to suggest that all of Europe had plunged into intellectual or cultural darkness. However, later generations misinterpreted his words, extending this definition to cover the entire medieval period. Another writer, Caesar Baronius, used the phrase saeculum obscurum to describe the 10th century, when Europe did indeed experience a lack of historical documentation about everyday life. However, even Baronius did not imply that this was a time of cultural decline. He was merely commenting on the scarcity of records. Despite this, the term Dark Ages continued to spread, and by the 18th century, it became a symbol of an age of ignorance, even though this was far from true. When it comes to education and science, the Middle Ages were far from stagnant. In fact, this period laid the foundations for many modern scientific disciplines. By the 11th to 13th centuries, Europe was home to universities that continue to operate today. The University of Bologna, founded in 1088, is considered the oldest in the world, and Oxford University, established around 1096, became one of Europe's leading centers of learning. Cambridge University followed in 1209, and by that time, Europe already had a well-developed education system. These universities played a crucial role in spreading knowledge from ancient Greece and Rome, as well as from the Arab world. Many of the achievements we associate with the Renaissance actually originated in the Middle Ages. For instance, medieval philosophers and scholars studied the works of Aristotle, Plato, and other ancient Greek thinkers, laying the groundwork for the development of Western science. The Middle Ages were also a time of significant technological advancements that had a profound impact on the world. For example, paper, which originated in China, made its way to Europe through the Arab world in the 8th century. In 793, the first paper mill in Baghdad was built, and paper soon spread throughout Europe. This invention created the conditions for the widespread dissemination of knowledge, eventually leading to the invention of the printing press in the 15th century. Other important medieval inventions include the astrolabe and compass, which contributed to advancements in astronomy and navigation. Mechanical clocks, which appeared in Europe in the 13th century, changed how people perceived time and laid the groundwork for future technological innovations. Eyeglasses, first introduced in the 13th century, improved the quality of life for thousands of people by making it possible to read and work with small details. Another deeply rooted myth is the idea that most people in the Middle Ages believed the Earth was flat. However, this is a misconception. Since ancient times, scholars have known that the Earth was spherical. Aristotle, in the 4th century BCE, proved that the Earth was round by observing the shadow it cast on the moon during lunar eclipses. These insights were preserved and passed on to medieval scholars. Galileo Galilei and Nicholas Copernicus, who developed the heliocentric theory, the idea that the sun is at the center of the universe, encountered resistance from religious authorities, but not because of the concept of a round Earth. The debate was about the movement of celestial bodies, not the shape of the planet. The Catholic Church never claimed the Earth was flat. This was a debate about whether the Earth or the sun was at the center of the universe. Even Christopher Columbus, contrary to popular belief, wasn't trying to prove that the Earth was round. That was already a well-accepted fact in his time. Columbus simply miscalculated the distance to Asia, leading to his discovery of the Americas. Another widespread myth is that women in the Middle Ages were completely powerless and lacked opportunities. In reality, women's status was much more flexible and varied than we might assume. Yes, patriarchal structures dominated, and in many aspects, women had fewer rights than men, but they were far from being entirely without opportunities. Widows, for example, could manage the property of their deceased husbands. And in many cases, women could run businesses and even join guilds. In England, there was a law that allowed women to engage in any trade. And in London, in the 14th century, women worked in a wide range of professions. In some areas, women even dominated certain industries. For instance, women controlled the majority of brewing. In Paris, the silk weaving guilds were entirely run by women. It's also important to highlight the existence of female warriors and political leaders. Joan of Arc is the most famous, but there were others, such as Jeanne of Flanders, who commanded an army during the War of the Breton Succession, and Jeanne de Belleville, the first female privateer in Europe. Myths also surround medicine in the Middle Ages. It's commonly believed that medieval doctors could offer nothing more than traditional medical practices like bloodletting and spiritual healing. However, this is far from the truth. Medieval medicine was based on the teachings of ancient physicians like Hippocrates and Galen, and it continued to evolve over the centuries. In the 11th century, the Church officially recognized surgery as a separate branch of medicine, which barbers practiced. Surgery in the Middle Ages was quite advanced. Doctors treated fractures, performed amputations, and even corrected defects like cleft palates. One of the most famous surgeons of the time, Ambroise Paré, began using prosthetics and developed methods for treating gunshot wounds, which were widely used in military medicine. Additionally, herbal remedies were commonly used to treat various illnesses. For example, willow bark, which was used in medieval medicinal concoctions, contains salicylic acid, the active ingredient that later became the basis for aspirin. Many medieval herbal recipes proved to be effective and continued to be used in subsequent centuries. The image of the medieval peasant as completely powerless, perpetually hungry, and ignorant is another myth. Peasants were far from being the primitive and helpless people they were often portrayed as. The Domesday Book, commissioned by William the Conqueror in 1086, contains detailed information about peasant landholdings and rights. These records show that peasants were well aware of their rights and often took part in legal disputes to defend their interests. Peasants were also actively involved in uprisings, demanding reduced taxes and the abolition of serfdom. The most famous of these was the Peasants' Revolt, led by Wat Tyler in England in 1381. During this revolt, the peasants clearly articulated their demands, demonstrating a solid understanding of the law and their rights. Technologically, medieval peasants were not backward either. Many of their farming methods were highly effective and required knowledge of biology, mechanics, and estate management. Such skills indicate that peasants were far from being stupid and ignorant, as is often suggested. Another stereotype is the notion that medieval people were filthy and that the stench of cities was unbearable. However, this is far from the truth. Public baths were widespread in medieval Europe and were frequented by people from all walks of life. In major cities like Paris and London, entire networks of bathhouses existed where people could wash and take care of their hygiene. Medieval people placed great importance on cleanliness, especially in the context of religious practices. In monasteries, for example, strict hygiene rules were observed. People regularly washed their hands, faces, and feet before meals, and wealthy city dwellers often had dedicated bathing rooms in their homes. The Middle Ages were not the dark and brutal era they are often portrayed to be. Instead, it was a time of great achievements in science, culture, and social organization. Medieval Europe gave the world universities, important inventions, and progressive social reforms. Many of the myths surrounding this period were created later to justify the superiority of subsequent eras, like the Renaissance. It's important to remember that every era has its unique characteristics, its highs and lows, but none deserves the label of dark. The Middle Ages were the foundation upon which modern society was built, and many of the achievements from that time still impact our lives today.